Good morning. Thanks for joining us. My name is Chip Webster. I've been a professional member since 2008. My business, which is named Furniture and Finishes, is restoring fine old furniture as well as designing and making fine new furniture. While I cover a lot of material in this presentation, my focus is going to be on the basics of veneering and getting started. I'll have some process slides, including some more advanced work so that you can see where this can lead to. This is all based on my research and experience. I consider myself a student. Others may take a different approach. But some of the work I do requires repairing and replacing veneer. So we'll cover what is veneer, we'll cover adhesives, different types of clamping systems, vacuum systems, the process of actually doing it, and I'll show you how I actually got started. And at the end of this, I have proposed some draft follow-on classes for those that are interested in pursuing this. So let's get started. Veneer are thin slices of wood, usually sliced off a log, but it can be shop sawn. There are a number of ways to slice veneer off of a log or cut veneer off of a log. I'm not going to go into a lot of that detail right now, but one of the things that struck me when I first got started is that the terminology is sort of the same as solid wood, but kind of not. What we talk about as flat sawn in veneer is called flat cut. And you see the abbreviation FC, and that's resulting in cathedrals or grain movement. And what we call quartered sawn in solid wood is actually called quarter cut in veneer, and it results in straight line growth. So commercial veneer can either be paper-backed, wood-backed, or no backing. And I brought some examples I'll show you in a little bit. The reason I put up laminations here is this, as I said, this was originally a presentation that I made a few years ago, and I've had occasion to replace stretchers or components for rocking chairs or chairs, and some of the techniques apply directly, and some of them I found apply a little bit differently. So there's some similarities, but there are a little bit of differences. But my focus today is on veneer. So why veneer? I find it's kind of fun to design with a veneer. That little box lid that you see in the bottom was a little piece of burl out of cherry burl out of a larger sheet, and I thought, what an interesting shape. You can see it. You can see it in the right here. That was the raw veneer. It sort of looked a little bit like a heart, so I worked on it a little bit and made it more like a heart, and then I found a piece, and I veneered it to a piece of ply, and I found a scrap piece of black walnut with a knot in it, and I thought, I wonder what that would look like. So it offers an opportunity for flexibility and creativity. It certainly offers an opportunity for using scarce and expensive material, and specifically a good example is burl and highly figured species. I've had people look at that table and tell me, how can you do that? You didn't allow for wood movement. Well, by using veneer on a proper substrate, I don't have to worry about wood movement. Now, maybe in the future I'll put a little bit of an asterisk there because there are some provisos, but generally I don't have to deal with wood movement. Commercial veneer comes in a variety of thicknesses. This is from a supplier that I use fairly often. Certainly wood is in Upper New York State. This chart was copied from their website, so that's the thickness of a piece of paper. Most of the common veneer that's commercially available that is not paper backed is in this range right here. That cherry table that I showed you just a minute ago was actually 1/16 of an inch. There are a number of different veneer suppliers available on the internet. Most of them, I would say, are probably quite reliable. As I said, these are the two that I have gone to the most. I typically don't go to a store to go buy veneer. I'm going to switch to a camera and show you a couple of examples. These are examples of figured woods. Interesting burl. This is a piece of dyed material. I'm not sure what the species is. The one thing I wanted to show you that I found out the hard way, is that this, let me get this to where you can see it. This is a piece of spalted western maple. It was shop sawn. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick. And I would consider this too thick for my use. Now maybe somebody else could use it, but I would run that through a drum sander to get it a little thinner. The reason I say that is because one of my early attempts at veneering, I had made some shop sawn madrone and made a tabletop out of it. And not knowing any better, I made it about 1/4 of an inch thick, and they were laminated boards stuck together, and looked good for quite a while until one day it was out in the sun with a furniture blanket on the top of it, and the top exploded. The wood shrank. So there's a point where solid wood, if it's too thick and you're trying to use it as veneer, is acting like real wood and not acting like veneer. The thing that I have found, at least, that makes veneer very approachable for something like this is it is controlled by the substrate and the adhesive. So the choice of adhesive and the choice of substrate makes a big difference. Here's another example of that crazy burl that I just showed you. I actually book matched that, and it almost looks like some kind of alien insect. There are different types of clamping systems. I show a picture of a version of a commercial veneer press. When I got started, I used what was up in the top right-hand corner, just a bunch of clamps and cawls, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. For a small panel, just a couple of melamine boards with a bunch of cawls, and if you can imagine putting that, your veneer goes inside, your substrate and veneer goes inside, and you clamp it together. And then when I first got started, that's what I did. The other thing that I've shown you is is a vacuum system. This is the Guild vacuum system. When it was installed here in the bench room. That's the picture on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, that vacuum bag and vacuum system is in my shop at the moment. And that picture, I was actually doing helping a Guild member veneer burl to the dash of a 1967 Austin Healey 3000. What you see there is a furniture blanket on top of a heating blanket, because the particular adhesive that I was using, and this was done in the wintertime, by the way, the particular adhesive I was using was wants to be cured at about 70 degrees. So the best way to ensure that is with a little bit of heating system. Just a picture of a cawl system, bigger scale than the melamine that I just showed you, but you can see You do need a lot of clamps if you're going to do large pieces. Those two photos, I'll show you the end result a little towards the end. Adhesives. I've used PVA, I've used Unibond 800, I've used hide glue in the form that you see there, and I've used some polyurethane. I just have not used epoxy, but I can show you that the epoxy that I'm talking about it's a slower cure. West Systems is one of them. System 3 is another one. This can be used, and there is an advantage to it because the working time is long, but it also requires a really long cure time. There are a number of others that I have used. When the fellow brought over the Austin Healey, he was thinking Dash. He was thinking he could use a simple type bound 2 or maybe 3, and I cautioned him that an open roadster is going to be exposed to some moisture and heat, and in fact I called the vendor that sells this stuff and this stuff in New Brunswick, Maine. Vacuum Systems, I think that is the name. And we actually used Unibond 800 because it does not shrink, and it does at all, and it does not generally bleed through. This has to be mixed. It's a 2-part adhesive, and the powder can be in a different color, and we used it for the burl. We used it for the burl because if it did bleed through, you can color it and make it work well. I did not bring any of my hide glue. I don't mix hide glue. I use the hide glue that is called Old Brown glue. It's made by a fellow in a conservator actually in San Diego. His name is Patrick Edwards. And I have found that it does have a date code on it, but I have also found that if you refrigerate it, it lasts a really, really long time. I have not had experience to be able to tell you when it goes bad, because if you don't refrigerate it, it will go bad. It's a natural protein. But I don't know what that's like. I just chose not to try to go there, so I just refrigerate it and heat it up when I need it. The other time that I do use hide glue for veneer work is for burl that is not going to be exposed to heat or moisture. Of course, hide glue is a reversible process, but the reason I like to use it for, in fact, I think I used it for this, is because burl has a lot of open voids in it, and when hide glue bleeds through, it was commonly, obviously, it was commonly used for antique furniture for hundreds of years. And the hide glue was just treated as part of the finish. It was typically coated with shellac, and it just wasn't a big deal. So typically I will do that myself for something that's not going to be exposed to unusual weather conditions. Standard PVA is elastic. So if I do a sample board to show a client, I will use it, but otherwise for something that's more permanent, I won't. Common ways that I joint veneer. The first time that I started doing this work was actually just using a straight edge and a low angle block plane. Standard low angle block plane. The veneer is on edge, and you get an excellent result that way. There is another tool Again, used with a straight edge. Michael Fortune wrote about this in Fine Woodworking a number of years ago, and well before we brought Michael out here to teach, I made one of these things. Of course, I didn't do it quite as well as the article probably indicated, so when he was here, he showed me how to tune it up. This is made with the old standard double-edged razor blade. So it's very, very thin. I don't know if you can actually see it protruding. You might be able to see it there. It does a really great job. So I have used both. One of the things that people use veneer for is called marquetry and parquetry. Marquetry is making pictures. Often they're landscapes, but they're not necessarily all landscapes. When you're doing that kind of work, you can cut veneer with scissors if it's thin enough, but if it's not, then you need something like a scalpel. This is a very thin, it's a double beveled blade, so you have to pay attention to where your bevel is. You can use a marking knife, but I don't, because those blades are thicker for me. There are some carpet utility knives that have a single bevel, and I've known some people that have used that quite successfully. I tend to use this. One of the tools that one of the people that is considered kind of the master of masters, at least in the United States, is a fellow by the name of Paul Church. He has taught a number of people veneer work, and he actually likes to use a 2-inch wide chisel. And if you go do any research on veneering, one of the tools that old school veneering artists used to use was a knife that actually came back with a long handle that came back up under your shoulder. And I haven't learned how to use that and probably won't, but it's kind of interesting to see how the old timers used to do it. But Paul's adaptation was a pretty hefty chisel with a 2-inch blade, and that's how he cuts veneer into patterns. One of the pieces that I'm going to show you a little bit later as a finished product was a fairly complicated piece of work, and actually, if you switch quickly to this screen, this is a tabletop that I needed to replace. It was a modern reproduction of an 18th century writing desk. And the task at hand when I first took on the commission was just to refinish it. And the problem was the finish was so bad that until I stripped the finish off, I didn't know that all of this issue existed. Big crack here, big crack here. And oh, by the way, the manufacturer didn't manage to get the miter done properly. The task here is to lay out the veneer. And what I'm showing here is taping up the back side first, not the show side. And that's what I'm using blue tape here for. And it's not just any blue tape. It looks like standard painter's tape. But there are different painter's tapes. This particular one is wrinkly. And the idea is that it's a little bit stretchy. A different one that I have also used is frog tape. Now, the stretchier, the better. I haven't actually done this yet for veneer. You could probably use electrician's tape. It's even more stretchy. The idea is that when you're trying to pull together a seam, such as here, to get it as close together as possible, plain old masking tape doesn't work well at all. I've had some experiences with adhesives that pull fibers up that I don't particularly want pulled up, so I'm a little careful about that. But the process here was to take the underside and get it taped up very tightly, and then flip it over and put all of the veneer tape down that you see with all the white. So I've also labeled here where I was using some flat cut panels and some quarter cut banding. If you recall back to the terminology that was in the beginning, one of the beginning slides. Now, the one mistake that I have heard some people make, and I learned ahead of time not to do this, and so far I have been fortunate, is that you have to remember to take the blue tape off before you glue something to a substrate. Otherwise, the blue tape just telegraphs through the veneer and you get to start over. Two different glue applicators I most commonly use. The objective is a nice, reasonably thin, consistent application of glue. I learned from Michael Fortune to use a trowel that's got a 1/32 inch groove, and it's especially effective for large panels, large surfaces. That's what this is. This is a type of linoleum trowel, I believe. You can't buy them a lot of places, but I do know that A-Boy Hardware by the Guild Shop has these. It's about that long, has a handle. I'll take the handle off and cut this in half, and that's the surface that I want. That's the 32nd of an inch groove. It's a really effective spreader. I had not used the little roller until recently when I did help the fellow with the Austin Healey Dash, and that little roller works pretty well. I would use it more. I would more likely use it for small pieces. That foam roller absorbs an awful lot of glue, but it is less messy to work with. This is some more advanced stuff. If you want to use a vacuum system to make some curved pieces, now you're going to start to do some real woodworking that you're more accustomed to in building forms. You can see what the structure of a form looks like. It gets sheathed with a type of plywood called wiggle wood, which is what this is. Very, very flexible. Or I have found that packing tape was one of my favorite things to use. This is completely coated with packing tape, so if you don't have melamine to make your platens out of, you can use MDF and just coat it with packing tape. You have to leave places for air to get in so that you can completely evacuate the bag, all of the air out of the bag. And this is a piece that can be put together in a short period of time. This is a quick picture or illustration of how that curved piece is essentially shop-made plywood. It just happens to be in a curved form. So in order to do that, the grain of the outside piece is this direction. The next piece the grain direction is this way. The center piece is this way. So you're constantly going at 90 degrees. This and this piece need to be the same thickness. That can be slightly different. These two need to be the same thickness. So depending on the thickness of the board that you're trying to make, you have to do a little bit of math, but you can custom make your own plywood. These are just some additional pictures of how I prepared what is called a packet, the layers of veneer. This is a particular case where I was joining two pieces together. One of the issues I learned early on to deal with was how to keep things from slipping around. So I use tape and even small brads to keep the packet together and not slide around. This was a larger piece, larger curved piece that I brought into the guild shop. I don't remember if this was a project build kind of thing or exactly what the circumstance was, but you can see there's a number of things you have to do. When you use, I've learned the hard way, when you use a vacuum bag, test it before you glue things up and put them in the bag, because in the bag is the wrong time to find out that you don't have a good seal. So there's a couple of pictures of a core coming out of the bag. And one of the things that I learned from Michael Fortune was when you've made a curved panel like this, you have rough edges and you don't have any square edges. So make little fixtures so that you can square things up. So these were just some images of a large curved panel in the process. This is a small panel. It has a joint here. I specifically did not put the back, I put the show face on, but not the back face on, so that I could show how I chose. If this was a little panel for a door for a cabinet, this is how I would have done the edging on it. But in order to put this edging on, you have to square up the panel. So that's what that slide is trying to communicate. And this is the kind of thing that we could address later in more detail in a class if folks wanted to have a hand at it. This was a large panel that I think this might have been the second time that I made this panel, and you can see on the left-hand side, it came out of the bag and I had to do a little remedial action. This was some time ago, and I think I didn't leave it in the bag long enough, and when I pulled it off, I realized I needed to clamp it up and let it set a lot longer. But it turned out all right. And the center picture looks like it's not square. That's a result of the camera angle. It actually was square. In fact, I find for my use, vacuum systems are best for flat panels and curved panels. They're not particularly suitable for the application that you see in the center. That particular top was from a class that we did with Michael Fortune. And in fact, I don't know if you can see the seams here very well, but each one of these is a small section. And if you were to imagine trying to glue these up individually and then stick it in a vacuum bag, you probably wouldn't get this to seal as well as you would like. And by the time you got to here, this would already be curing and set. So this is a case where you make a positive and negative, this being, I'll call this the positive form with a router table, and the reverse becomes the clamp that you use to clamp this all the way around. So the vacuum bag sometimes has some limitations. The Guild's vacuum bag is a large bag. It can handle lots of thinner projects. In fact, I think when we did this particular class, I think we got all of them in either in 2 sessions or maybe in one. The very large piece that I showed you, the very large curved piece, I could probably do 2 of those at a time, but anything much larger than that, it's not quite as effective. This is a dresser that I restored a number of years ago, and so you saw some of the process photographs early on. This is how it came in. This is the process. It had a veneered top, and veneered sides, as well as the front, the whole exterior of the carcass was veneer. But you can tell, you can see that the veneer was ragged on the bottom. I filled it in with Bondo, but then I needed to basically resheath it. And there was enough of a reveal that I elected to make two new side panels and veneer them on. But I did a lot of research trying to figure out, clearly somebody must have done this before, and I did not want to take the panels out of the case. I couldn't find any place where it had been written about. I'm sure I didn't invent this for the first time, but I couldn't find it, so I had to come up with my own application. And what you see is how I went about doing it. There's actually 3 pieces of veneer to make up that panel. That's one panel that was installed, so I've actually veneered it to a paper back and to make the panel, and then very carefully cut it to size. It's ready for sanding and finishing. A new top had to be made. Again, three pieces put together. The edge banding is beech. The veneer was actually quarter cut mahogany. It's also called ribbon mahogany. And that's what it looked like when it was completed. This was a small maple dresser with a mirror, and in the world of antiques, this was actually called a marriage. The original mirror is the small mirror. The cradle wasn't the right cradle for the dresser in the first place, and the client really didn't like the size and scale of the mirror, so she asked me to make a new mirror, which is the one that you see in the back. This is a case where I veneered the bird's eye maple veneer to a solid maple frame. I was comfortable doing that because the width of the mirror frame was not so wide that it was going to move a great amount. That particular veneer, by the way, was adhered to the frame with hide glue. And I do recall that at one point in time on the right-hand side, I had to remove the veneer once and redo it, which is one of the significant advantages of using hide glue. This particular tabletop, I wanted to show you what I often find when I'm doing this. Now, this was a modern reproduction, but this is poplar. There's no backer. There's a couple of issues with this, in my opinion. One is that it's poplar. It's going to expand in this direction, and it did, and there was no backer. When I made a new one, I made the substrate that I used was plywood, and the thickness of this veneer face is the same thickness as the veneer face that I put on the back, so that it's balanced. I have some examples of tops in my shop that I have replaced that are cupped. So these were the process steps going through here. You saw some of the earlier tape up and layout issues. Plus I was adding banding and profiling it. And that's the result. And this is an example of new work. Several of you may have seen this at the gathering of the guild. So I did this a number of years ago, and I really don't recall now if it was a plywood substrate or a MDF substrate. A word about MDF. There are different grades of MDF. I would not use the stuff that is available from Home Depot. I go to Hardwood Industries and get furniture grade MDF. These books are my favorites. I brought actually this one. Craig Thibodeau is a very fine furniture maker out of San Diego. He learned his craft of veneering and marquetry from the fellow that I told you about, Paul Church in Santa Barbara. And I think this book came out 2 years ago. This is just an excellent book. But it wasn't available when I got started. What was available to me at the time that I got started was the one in the middle, Veneering and Inlay. So I could add one other person to the list of articles, and that's a fellow by the name of Scott Grove in Upper New York State. I've actually taken a couple of video classes, online classes with him. So for those that are interested, what I'm thinking about is doing a couple of follow-up classes, and probably in this sequence, you really, I got started just by doing a simple flat panel, and you learn the things to do and the things to not do on something that's simple and not complex. So I'm thinking something like 2, maybe 3 sessions by Zoom, something that's got some demo and instructions and a homework assignment, maybe an intermediate session for assistance, and then a final session with show and tell. We could do something similar as a follow-up with a curve panel. That's more involved because you have to make forms, but it's also pretty fun. So, questions?
Well, Chip, there were a few questions on the chat that you might address. One, do you think a seal anneal would work as a clamping system for small items?
Probably, but I would have to say this kind of thing, the answer I'm going to give you is the same answer if this was a finishing class. I would do a test, because right now I don't know that I would have enough confidence in it. The one thing, I'll tell you why I say that. I have had some cases of failure in the Guild vacuum bag because I didn't have an adequate seal. But I would make it a simple test. I would not, I wouldn't do something precious with it. What else?
Can you discuss the use of glycerin to help flatten highly figured veneers?
Burls and highly figured veneers come very, very wrinkly. The veneer, the walnut burl that was used on the Austin Healey Dash was like that. Now you can go off and buy, and I have done this. I've made all of the common novice mistakes. I think most of the common novice mistakes, like buying specially prepared veneer softener, but it's nothing more than water and glycerin. And in fact, I'm not even convinced that you absolutely have to have the glycerin. I've just used water. But you do have to soften the veneer and put it between layers of newsprint, preferably newsprint that has no ink, and soften it and flatten it and press it. And the results I have found to be tremendous. You could make, if you want to make your own veneer softener, it's a fairly simple formula for how much glycerin to add to water. But you do have to press it for a few days and change out the paper as the water transfers to the newsprint. You need to change out the paper.
So how do you deal with glue bleed through using adhesives other than hide glue?
It's a I find that it's kind of a case by case circumstance. I have had excellent results with flat panels with cold pressed veneer glue or Unibond 1. I don't get bleed through, and it's a very rigid glue line. I don't have a problem. If I'm using Unibond 800, such as I used on the big curved panel that I did, and the Austin Healey Dash, the bleed through can be dealt with a little bit with Unibond 800 by the color of the powdered adhesive or binder that you're using with the mixture that you're making. So the vacuum systems, I think, has two different colors. One is lighter and one is a lot darker, and you just deal with the bleed through that way. So far, that's been my experience. Okay?
Thank you, Chip.
Thank you.